Welcome back to the second video on the channel about this journey I'm on. Now, I wanted to talk in this video a little bit about the influences for this project. Not my influences, I mean they are my influences, but I'm massively influenced by tons of artists and it changes daily, and my entire career has been based around the fact that I don't really have a genre or a style or a thing that I'm really into. For me, as long as it's heartfelt and meant, it's great music. However, for this project, I wanted to have a little bit of a direction. I wanted to narrow down the kind of aesthetic, the scope of what I was going to cover. Before I get stuck into the tracks or the artists that I'm going to be sort of really focusing on and learning from, I wanted just to talk a little bit about the playing and a very strong word I've had to have with myself a few times whilst making this video. I decided to try and learn a few tracks or ideas or bits to put in this video to learn from, really, to base my first little foray into writing on, and it's not up to scratch. I was recording them as demos, just playing them, learning them, practicing them, recording them, and I'd noticed that maybe one of the preamps on the desk wasn't great, or perhaps I should have used a different channel, or maybe I fluff a note on something. The vocals that I put down as guide vocals, I then thought about re-recording, and in actual fact, it's not what this project is about. This project is not about perfection in terms of production or playing at the moment. It's about learning from it. And really, I have to be really aware of what it is I'm doing at every given point. Really, all I needed to do with these tracks was learn enough to be able to get an idea of where the influence comes from. And I hope you watch these bearing in mind that I'm not a professional singer, I'm not a professional guitarist. My background lies in playing drums, and I would never in a million years put any of my work as a drummer out at this level. It really is just a sketchbook or a notebook. So please appreciate the fact that it's taken a bit of courage to just kind of go, I work with some of the best guitarists, vocalists, bass players, producers in the world, and it's not on a patch with any of that. I understand that, I appreciate it. I hope it's received in the way it was intended. I have to have a strong word with myself several times. Anyway, let's have a look at these four artists in turn and discuss what it is that I take from them broadly, but also specifically with this track and how I'm going to use it. Paul Weller. Where can I start with Paul Weller? I can't go into detail about how much of an influence Paul Weller is on me musically, because it would be a very boring YouTube channel of just me rattling on about it. I studied and really continue mentally to study with Steve White, who was Paul Weller's drummer for many years. From the Style Council days, he joined at the age of 16 and left. I forget which album it was, the solo album he left in, but I started studying with Steve White in the early 90s, in the era when Paul Weller was recording, really, as far as I'm concerned, his solo project, his three greatest albums, or four if you include Livewood. So in 1992, you have the first Paul Weller solo record. In 1993, he brought out an album called Livewood, and then in 1995, he brought out an album called Stanley Road. But in 94, so we have 4 consecutive years of releases, we had an amazing live album called Livewood. So without getting too embroiled in my love of Paul Weller, let's try and distill this down from what I can take as a songwriter. The first thing is, particularly on these 3-4 albums, is his Britishness. Not in that weird patriotic way that people seem to be patriotic about a flag and be proud of where they were born, which is just fate. More in a quirky, pastoral kind of way. Hard-hitting, funky, rocky, heavy in places, and yet sensitive and poetic in others. Certainly wistful and esoteric at times, but also incredibly relevant and accessible lyrically. These 4 4 albums particularly remind me of much happier times in the early 90s of hope and sunshine, but also the incredible playing of the band Steve Craddock, but also Yolanda Charles and Damon Minchella. Damon and Yolanda, 2 people that I've been really lucky enough to work with. Yolanda Charles, I did a gig with Roland Gift from Fine Young Cannibals. That was phenomenal. Seeing the bass player that I grew up watching on stage playing with Steve White whilst playing those Fine Young Cannibal hits with that voice was really quite something. And Damon, I owe Damon an awful lot. He's taught me a lot over the years. But also Brendan Lynch, the producer, just kind of injecting little quirky weirdness in here and there, synths and blips and kind of weird scratchy production. That's Weller broadly speaking, but what about this track specifically? So initially, I think the simplicity of the lyrics, it's very, very obvious what he's singing about here. There's no kind of massive ambiguity. Well, it is ambiguous because he's not being super specific, but it's not massively metaphorical. It's pretty straightforward, the lyrics here. Very clever, very poetic, but also very accessible, but simple. That's the first thing that goes through my mind, simplicity of the lyrics. The second thing is the quirky, but again, accessible kind of arrangement of the track. It's not straightforward verse, chorus, there's kind of flipped upside down bits and kind of weird production ideas in there as well, which I quite like. And the last thing, hold on, gonna need this. I'm gonna need to lower you down. On a production note of playing this, I played it on the Gretsch that I've been lent. It's set up for slide guitar. I spoke to Ben, the guy who lent it to me. Gauge 12 strings, don't know what that means with a high action. Oh boy, that's hard to play. A riff that I've been playing for years, instantly recognisable and fantastic. However, when you actually start to put this together, it's like a little blues turnaround, a little blues riff. It's just a blues riff. It's a little blues turnaround. So the other idea is kind of just taking an idea and playing around with it, repurposing it, essentially stealing an idea, but just kind of fiddling around, finger picking it, changing the order of it. That's what everybody does, right? What do they call it? Case. Copy and steal everything. C-A-S-E. Copy and steal everything. Thank you, Mr. Weller. 1990 album, Shake Your Money Maker, Black Crowes. I remember vividly hearing this for the first time. It was in my friend Steve Cooper's bedroom on Strobe Road, in the house of the garage that we used to rehearse in my first ever band that I joined when I was 14. He played me this record on vinyl. He made me a cassette copy of it, and it skipped on the record, the vinyl copy on the cassette recording in the middle of the guitar solo on Hard to Handle. And I remember exactly where it is, and I now can't listen to that song, that album, without remembering that. But this is straight up rock and roll. Chris Robinson's voice is absolutely immaculate on this album. Steve Gorman's drumming, man, it changed my perspective completely on it. Up until that point, I was interested in clever drumming. This was just straight up slinky, swampy rock and roll. So what can I take from learning this little bit of She Talks to Angels off of that album? Well, the first thing is open tunings. I'd never done open tunings until I sat down to learn this. I've become really, really genuinely fascinated, as you'll find out on the next track. Very similar thing. Never done anything to do with open tunings. Really enjoyed the process of learning about this. The one thing I would say is Chris Robinson's voice has really made me question my voice. Yes, I can pitch, but I hate the sound of it. Can I really ever develop or find the character in my voice to ever get to the point where I don't hate it? I tend to use a lot of overdubs with harmonies and sort of effects and things on my voice to try and disguise it because I hate it. So that's the one thing that goes through my head. However, experimenting with open tunings is definitely something that I've got from this track that I need to work through. Alone, listless, breakfast table in an otherwise empty room. young girl, violence, center of her own attention. Mother reads aloud, child tries to understand it, tries to make her proud. The shades come down, it's in my head, painted room, can't deny there's something wrong. Don't call me daughter, not bitch. Pearl Jam. I mean, 10 blew my mind. When it came out in 1991, I mean, we were having our minds blown on a weekly basis, really, in that year. If you were around in that era, you'll remember that literally on a weekly basis, groundbreaking, mind-blowing albums were being released every single week, almost every single day. However, for the grunge band of the era for me was really Pearl Jam. I loved Nirvana, loved the punkiness of it, I loved the Chili Peppers, loved the Spin Doctors, all that stuff, but for me, Pearl Jam had a little bit of everything. My favourite Pearl Jam drummer of all time, Dave Krusen, who played on 10. Absolutely phenomenal. In fact, the only drummer from any of these bands on here not to be called Steve, an interesting observation. However, the power, not just of his drumming, but the band in general, the kind of just vividness of everything, the absolute, how do you describe it? It's like just all in. That's what you get from an album like 10. However, the track that I've just learnt really is off of an album called Verses, or VS, and this came out a couple of years later. And I have to admit, at the time, it kind of passed me by. It struck me that Verses had all of the kind of punky stuff that I liked off a couple of tracks on 10. But then there was this kind of ballady, more rock and roll thing that at the time I didn't really sort of like connect with until I started getting into like Black Crowes and rock and roll and a little bit more straight ahead rock and roll stuff. And songs like Dissident and Daughter, absolutely phenomenal. Again, open tuning, but like a hybrid G tuning. And I seem to have a propensity for what I think is called pedaled stuff. This is where like there's a drone going through it, and this has got this G note that's on the lowest string or the high string. I don't know how you talk about it, the top string. Is always open G on this, and I really enjoy that kind of droniness to it, and I like that approach. I also picked up that with the Black Crowes stuff, there's an awful lot of kind of Keith Richards-y type stuff, so I'm thinking the first track that I'm going to approach is going to be in some kind of open tuning, and I'm going to mess around and take the Paul Weller approach of maybe I'll stick with the Daughter tuning, because the Gibson that I've got is tuned open to that G hybrid tuning, and I'm going to mess around with that for a bit and see what comes up, but take the Paul Weller approach of kind of repurposing stuff and play through it. So that's going to be my starting point. More than just a film. The Blues Brothers, wow, what a band. I mean, they had a live album in 78, a live album in 1980. I got into this even before I started playing drums. Steve Jordan, the drummer on this, not just the most phenomenal musician in this band at all. You've got Duck Dunn, you've got Steve Cropper, Matt Murphy, Alan Rubin, Paul Schaefer, blah, 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 blah. I mean, where do you stop with a band this phenomenal? The intro guitar parts that I've just played is Matt Murphy and Steve Cropper's guitar parts from an arrangement of a Delbert McClinton track called B-Movie Boxcar Blues. And really, for me, this just blew my socks off. I mean, I always make a joke as a drummer that they don't dance to guitarists, and often when I find guitarists playing, they tend to fill the space. Like it's actually easier to play all of the notes than it is to play some of them and leave space, because with space you have to account for it, but you're not actually physically playing. And I'll leave a link to a live video, a version of this, and you just need to watch Matt Murphy and Steve Cropper's body language when they play this intro. If you turn it off, it's like when you watch Nile Rodgers, they are time. I mean, that's the thing I take from this, is that the musicians in this band and the arrangements and just the jigsaw puzzleness of this, if that's a word, like everything just fits together like glue. and it's all there for a purpose, and it is so well played, but at the same time it hits so damn hard. And so what can I take from this track? Well, essentially that there's beauty and you can say things with the humble pentatonic, but also that if I'm going to write anything where there is any soloing, and I'm not really usually a massive fan of kind of guitar solos and stuff, I want it to be as well played and as meaningful as this. Plus, really, that time is everything. So this is my starting point. I'm going to take some ideas from the open tuning stuff. I'm going to mess around with it, be a bit kind of repurposey with it, play around with it for a bit and see what I can kind of come up with, and then see if I can kind of take lyrically, mainly from Weller, mainly from Eddie Vedder. In Daughter, the lyrics are just kind of so minimalist and so kind of stripped right back and yet so visually vivid. I challenge you to not listen to those first 18 words or whatever they are. Alone, listless, breakfast table in an otherwise empty room, young girl, violence, center of own attention. I mean, center of her own attention. It's just incredible lyrics and so vivid, so minimalist. And that's what I want to try and do, is not get too embroiled in rhythmically trying to make it all fit or rhymingly trying to make it all fit. I just want to say what I'm seeing essentially in my head and put it to an open tuning progression that I have repurposed from somewhere else. That's the plan. Let's see how I get on with it. If you're not subscribed to the channel, hit the notifications bell, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment below, let me know anything that's here. And if you want to watch any of the links or want to read any extra things, I'll put a Spotify link to a playlist of these tracks below. You can have a listen, and I will see you on the next video. Take it easy.